As a kid in the house I grew up in, my younger sister and I shared a room since we were close in age, about 2 years apart. And my older sister, who was 6 years older, had her own room, and then obviously my parents had their bedroom. Now, I mention my sisters in the rooms because that's important. My mum and dad always told my younger sister and me that we could have our own rooms when my older sister decided to move out, and she finally moved out for college when I was 13, and my younger sister moved into her old room. Now, we had always heard and seen things in the home, usually just shadows out of the corners of our eye, or hearing people walking on the floors and such. Nothing too crazy. Literally, not even 3 days after my younger sister moved into the other bedroom, I started waking up to her in bed with me the next morning. She always said it was because she was scared, but would never tell me what she was scared of. Months pass, and finally they decide to let me make over my room if I want. Somehow, my sister talked me into switching rooms, and of course, since the other room was bigger and had a futon bed and a private entrance and exit, I agreed. My first night in there, I wrote in my journal while chilling on the futon, while watching my favourite show, Viva La Bam. I wasn't keeping track of time, and when my show went off, I realised it was almost midnight and put my journal away and tried to go to sleep since I had school the next day. I'm almost asleep, and I hear my journal pages being written on and the pages flipping about. I open my eyes slightly just to see who was doing this. Nobody. Nobody was in the room except me. I pulled my blanket over my head and laid there in fear until I passed out. When I woke up, my journal was laying in the middle of my bedroom floor. I had put it on my shelf and was open to the last page I wrote in and was scribbled all over. I showed my family and asked if any of them had done it. They all said no, and my parents didn't believe me when I told them what happened and basically said I was making it up. Things only got worse from there, as my electronics would sometimes go haywire, turning on and off, batteries dying, phone ringing even if nobody was calling, etc. And my closet door would open at night while I was sleeping, even if I tried to block it shut. It got so bad that I started sleeping with my bedroom door open and begging to keep the hallway light on, or even sometimes begging to sleep on the couch in the living room. This went on for 4 years until my dad experienced something that scared him so bad he decided we were moving. When I got home from school, he asked, "Did you come home at any point today?" I said no, because obviously I was at school. He also asked my sister this, and she said no as well. He asked if the outside door in my room was locked, and I said it always was because I never used it. Finally, he explained that while he was home that morning, he walked past my room and swore up and down that I was sitting on my bed, watching TV and writing in my journal, and that he even spoke to me asking why I didn't go to school. But I wouldn't even acknowledge him and just continued writing. He said he looked away for a second, and when he looked back, the room was empty. He checked the whole house, and he was alone, so he left and sat at my Nana and Papa's house until he knew it was time for my sister and I to come home. This story is the first encounter I've ever had with the paranormal, and also played a big part in my interest in the paranormal. When I was very young, about 6 years old, my parents decided to move out of their apartment and to purchase a house. They purchased a house on 44th and Villard in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. It wasn't a good neighborhood, but it was good for my parents, who had 2 young children and a third on the way. The house was a very small 3-bedroom stairless ranch. For those of you who are unfamiliar with this type of house, it's a single-storied house with no basement and no upstairs. It had a bathroom, 3 bedrooms, a living room, kitchen, and a laundry room. The house was purchased from an old guy whom we didn't know much about. Now, when you picture haunted houses, most people automatically picture a huge, mansion-type house with plenty of rooms and dark hallways, etc. Get that picture out of your head for this story. Just picture a small, white house in the inner city ghetto. The paranormal events started almost immediately after we were settled in the house. It all started with me and my nightmares. Night after night, I would have reoccurring nightmares of being chased by a red-haired woman with pure white eyes, and I would wake up in the middle of the night, screaming and running into my parents' bedroom. My parents really never gave these events much thought. They simply assumed that I was just a small child with an active imagination, being frightened by nightmares. Then, they started to pay attention. These nightmares suddenly turned into reality. I would have a nightmare and wake up to see the head of a lady with red hair on the wall chanting. I could never see her entire body, just a head sticking out of the wall. She became known in my house as the lady on the wall. She had glowing white eyes, and she would simply stare straight ahead and mumble terrifying gibberish. It would sound like li do da ra, or some weird gibberish in a deep voice. I would freak out and run into my parents' room and tell them what had happened. I always had the impression that she did mean to do me harm, and that's why I always freaked out. Then Christy, my younger sister, and Alicia, my older sister, started seeing things as well. One night, the entire household was awakened by the sound of my sisters screaming in terror. My parents and I rushed into their room to see what was going on. They tearfully explained that they had both seen people dancing in a circle on their ceiling. Another time, as a small child, I had a dream that I was being chased by the lady on the wall. All over the entire ground of my house were these symbols, and every time I would step on one, skeleton hands would reach out from under the couch and other furniture and attempt to grab my legs. Now that I'm older, I recognized that the symbols were occult in nature. Pentagrams, stars, and other symbols that were definitely occult symbols. And I had never seen any of these before. I was only between 5 and 7 years old. I don't remember my exact age when I had the dream. Another incident I remember very well was one night around Christmas time. My parents and my little sister, Christy, went Christmas shopping. They left my older sister and me at home, and while they were gone, the subject of the lady on the wall came up. My sister dressed up as the little orphan Annie that previous Halloween, so she had a red wig left over from the costume. We somehow got the crazy idea to call the lady on the wall. My sister donned the red wig, and we both skipped around the house, saying, "Lady on the wall, if you're real, show yourself." We were both just little kids bouncing around having a good time, when suddenly things started happening. Every single window and door in our house started slamming open and closed, and the windows were bolted shut for the winter. My sister and I were terrified and were crying hysterically out of fear. We looked out of the kitchen window that was shaking to see if there was somebody outside trying to break in. There was nobody there. Our dog, a toy poodle, was barking frantically at the door, and its hair stood straight up like a cat. The dog hid under the couch and refused to come out, but continued barking. Finally, I put on a Christian record of kids' songs. My father was very religious, and it all quieted down again. My parents arrived home to find us crying and huddling in fear in the corner, with Christian music blaring in the background. My father walked over and turned off the radio and asked us what was going on. We tearfully explained to him, and he became enraged. He yelled, "Don't ever do that again. You were calling demons into this house." Now, the years kept passing, and the phenomena kept taking place. Eventually, we all grew up, and the nightmares and hallucinations may be easily brushed aside when they are happening to a small child, but not to a 15-year-old boy. As these things continued, my parents really started getting concerned. There would be thunderous bumps in the night, a loud bellowing laugh that would always awaken even my parents, and far too many other things that happened over the years. As strange as this story sounds, it gets stranger. My parents eventually became aware that something was not right in the house and put it up for sale. And get this, they had it listed for dirt cheap. I don't know if this was the average price of properties at the time, but I recall my father lowering the price substantially just to get out of that house. Now, around this time, I was about 15 years old. Here is the weird part. One night, I had a dream that I was standing in a wedding, holding a beautiful blonde girl's hand. Suddenly, I felt a tap on my shoulder. I turned around to see the lady on the wall. I remembered jumping in my sleep and trying as hard as I could to open my eyes and wake up. She looked at me and said, "Don't worry, I will never haunt you again. You are marrying my daughter." And with that, I woke up. Now, the weird thing is that we continued to live in the house for about a year until we sold it. For that last year, and to this day, I have never had another dream about her, or any other paranormal experiences that had to do with the lady on the wall. I'm now 35 years old, and I'm happily married. My wife is Asian, and is nowhere near a blonde. I still, to this day, have no clue what that dream was all about, but I wanted to investigate. I went back to the house, hoping to ask the new owners if they had any experiences, but the house is boarded up and deserted. It's the only deserted house in a 5-block radius the last time I was there. Coincidence? There was a sticker on the window that informed me that the house was now owned by the city, so I called the number and inquired. The housing authorities alerted me that the house had been deserted since 2003, and the people who had bought the house from us had left without selling it. It just remained there until the city seized it because no taxes were being paid on the property. The owners didn't seem to care too much. This has baffled us for a long time, and we still don't know the purpose of these hauntings. I contacted several supposed psychics and individuals who claimed to have abilities and told them my tale. They had wild ideas like, maybe your true soulmate has already died, or maybe someone who died is in love with you. The answers they gave me did not satisfy my curiosity as to why these things happened. Was the spirit still haunting the place and made the family after us leave? Also, back in 2011, my sister went to the house and it was still deserted. She took a few pictures but couldn't get inside. Perhaps in the future, I will return to the home that I grew up in and seek the answers for myself. I think my house unhaunted itself. For background, we moved into our current home almost 5 years ago. There were always little things that seemed odd to me, and then it got to the point where I was so sure it was haunted, I looked into the history of the house, but didn't find anything. We bought it from a young couple that lived there less than a year, for $15,000 less than they asked. They had some baby items, but no bed or anything large. I thought maybe their baby died and they wanted to move, but I was wrong. I can't even remember everything that happened when we moved in, but this is what I can remember. When we moved in, all the doors and windows had chimes. If they were opened, a chime would sound. The chimes seemed to happen a lot, but we have 3 dogs, and I guess I just subconsciously assumed it was just my husband or one of my stepkids opening doors. At some point, a few months after we moved in, I was home alone. I'm off every other Friday, and it finally dawned on me that I was hearing the chimes. I couldn't figure out which door or window it was coming from. This continued when I was home alone or when my family was around, but no one was causing the chimes. Only I heard it. Eventually, I removed all the devices that caused the chimes because it was scaring me. We live in Florida, and the house is a ranch style without an attic or basement. That said, I kept hearing footsteps upstairs. It was a scampering of little rodent feet. If you've ever lived on the first floor of an apartment, you know what it sounds like to have someone walk across the room above you. That's exactly what it sounded like. There is absolutely no way anyone would stand up there, let alone walk. I did have my husband poke his head up there and check, but there wasn't anything, not even rodent droppings. The washer and dryer are in the garage right next to the garage door. One day, I was cleaning the kitchen and went to throw the kitchen towel in the washer. I always keep my washer open if it's empty. So I open the garage door and toss the towel in. I then decide to do an entire load of laundry. My closet with my laundry basket is on the same wall as the washer, just the opposite side. I grab the basket and go back to the garage, and the washer lid is closed. No way did throwing a little dish towel have enough force to knock it closed, and I would have heard it slam because I was right there. Several times, I would start a load of laundry and go back and check if it was done, and the washer lid would be open. My washer will not run or add water with the lid open. Now, none of these things alone are too bad, but altogether, especially the footsteps, had me freaked. I talked to my husband about it many times, but he never heard anything, and he didn't believe me. I told him this is exactly what happens in every scary movie. No one believes the person experiencing everything until it's too late. I didn't keep track of the timeline here, but 8 to 10 months after we moved in, and I've been telling hubby about the sounds and everything, and something finally happens to him. It was late at night. I was sitting on the sofa watching TV. Stepkids were with their mother, and hubby was in his video game room, which was in the back of the house, and seems to have been an add-on to the house at one point. My husband comes into the living room and says, "Haha, very funny." I had no idea what he was talking about. He said I was outside of his window, tapping repeatedly on it. I so was not. I still don't think he believes me. Slowly, the upstairs walking stopped, and we had no more incidents. Until one day, I was at work, and my husband and stepson were the only two home. Husband was mowing the grass, and stepson decided to do a load of his laundry. Apparently, when stepson went to check his laundry, the washer was open and full of suddy water. He went outside and asked hubby why he stopped the laundry. My husband told me this story when I got home, and swears me and stepson set this up. This didn't happen, and I never talked to my stepson about what was happening, because I didn't want to scare him, and he and stepdaughter were only with us that time every other weekend. Again, everything calms down, and it seems like at least a year goes by without incident. Then, my dad dies. He lived in Ohio, and had never visited my new home. 3 to 4 months after he passed, I was in the kitchen cooking dinner. Husband was in the game room and stepkids were with their mother. My kitchen, living room and dining room is kind of open, with a wall partway separating the kitchen and living room. It's like a big circle with a small wall in the middle, so I can enter the kitchen from the living room dining room area, or the opposite side that leads to the garage and my bedroom. Anyway, I'm bent over checking the food in the oven, and I look over to the garage door, and clear as day, I see a man walk by the living room. I just see hairy legs and tan shorty shorts. I immediately know this isn't hubby, and walk back through the opposite side and look into the living room. No one was in there, and my dogs are not fazed, just chilling on the sofa. I go into the back room to check hubby, thinking maybe it was him. He's kicked back with his legs on the computer desk watching YouTube. As soon as I see him, I burst out crying. I'm not a crier, so this scares hubby. I tell him what happened, and he offers to hang out with me while I cook. I must have really freaked him out, because he only left that room to eat, sleep, and work. After thinking about it, I feel like those were my dad's legs. He had these tan shorty shorts he wore when I was a kid. He never wore shorts in public, but we lived in a trailer without air conditioning and it got hot. I'm positive he didn't own those shorts anymore. I moved to Florida over 20 years ago, but I still feel like that was my dad. That happened about 2 years ago, and knock on wood, I haven't had any incidents since. Also, this was told to me by my parents. When I was a young child living in Ohio, before we moved into the trailer, we were living in a 2-story house. My grandpa lived upstairs, and there was a big window on the front of the house upstairs that he would sit in, drink coffee, and people watch. My grandpa ended up dying of cancer in that house. About a year later, someone new moved into the house right across the street. One day, my mum is chatting with the woman that moved in, and she asked my mum who was the man that sat in the upstairs window drinking coffee. No one had moved into that part of the house. My parents were renovating to turn it into a single-family home. I've always been sensitive to spirits and paranormal my entire life. It runs in the family on my dad's side. I recently moved states with my children after leaving a bad relationship with their father. I'm currently staying with family while house hunting, sleeping in their living room. Anyway, about a week after we arrived, my nephew said he walked by the living room and saw a dark figure. He said it looked like the Grudge with hair covering eyes, standing in the corner and watching us sleep, and ducked down like it was hiding from him. He then said he saw this figure on many different nights, just watching us sleep. My sister now has said this morning at like 4:30 a.m, she came downstairs and walked by the living room and saw a black figure crawling around the side of the couch towards where we were sleeping. She said she thought it was one of my kids, but then noticed we were all on the blow-up mattress asleep, so she took off running. I've been waking up like almost every hour on the hour throughout the night, feeling like I'm being watched. My son, who is 1, will wake up screaming, and my daughter, who's 2, will wake up and say the ghost is scaring her. I've told it to leave many times, but it always comes back. I've placed crystals in the room, salted. I'm considering burning sage and doing an egg cleanse. What do you think? Why would it be watching us sleep? Update: Himalayan salt lamps haven't helped. Prayer helps temporarily, but not for long. After I salted, my nephew said he saw the Grudge thing, as he calls it, in the woods behind the house and said it looked like its clothes were burnt. He also said he could feel it was evil. Update, 19th of June 21. My son woke up about 11:30 p.m, screaming and pointing to the corner. He refused to sleep on the blow-up mattress and wanted the couch, so he didn't go back to sleep until 5:30 a.m. All night, I could feel it watching us. I did the saging yesterday, resalted, and egg cleanse. This was the first night I didn't wake up every hour on the hour. And also the first night my son didn't wake up screaming. So far so good, but not letting my guard down. My home, and the ones to the left, right, and back of it, had some strange occurrences throughout my family's time living there. We were there from the time I was 4, up until the week before I turned 11. There is a lot to cover, so I'll try and simplify what I can. My family's home was almost perfect from age 4 until around age 7, but around then is when things started to occur. Things started to go missing in everyone's rooms, so the entrance locks were switched, but it still continued. Doors that were fully closed and secure would open on their own, and doors that were open would slam. Light bulbs started bursting or popping while they were off. There were constant cold spots throughout the home despite everything being well insulated. Things were happening more and more, and it put us all on edge. We all started feeling negative whenever we were on the property. Soon after, my dad started to become very abusive towards my mum, despite having a great relationship before then. He started acting like a completely different person. He would be physically violent and would abuse her emotionally as well. The smallest little thing would set him off, and my mum would constantly put herself in between me or my brother and my dad to protect us. He became more controlling with her. He would only let her buy groceries, made her get rid of her friends, and sold her vehicle, so she was stuck at home while he went off and worked. As that progressed, more started happening. We had nightmares, bad nightmares sometimes, but we never shared any except for one, where the house was burning down with us in it. Small fires would start on their own with no explanation as to how they started. My mother and I would get shoved or poked sometimes. I would hear her call for me to come to her when she wasn't home, and when she was home, I'd find her and ask what she wanted, only to find out she never called me. There were a few nights where my mum heard a scream in the house, so she ran into the room to check on me. Someone, early in the morning, stood at my window, their silhouette clearly visible, and knocked. The only problem is that the only way to get to that window was by being on a porch that was high off the ground, which my dad removed months before the knock happened. The floor in my room started falling in, board by board. When the first board fell, I found out where everyone's stuff was going. There was a crawl space that went under the house that was only accessible from a small door at the back of the house that my dad had cut the lock off after things were found. There's plenty of other things that happened in that house, but those were some of the most notable. The house to the left of mine had almost exclusively a single person at the time living in it, with the exception of one family. It had something in it that would physically attack the occupant by throwing things, pushing them, hitting them, pinching them, pulling hair, etc. Nails would sometimes come out of the floor and stab into your foot if you had the misfortune of walking over it. Some of the people that lived in that home died there, and the ones that didn't get sick moved away only to die within months of moving. The only ones that were okay in the long term were the family. The house to the right had 3 families move in after the previous ones would leave that were nearly identical, husband, wife, and son around my age. The wives would get pregnant with a daughter, the couples would argue, divorce, then the families would move. This happened to those families back to back. The house to the back of ours burned on 2 separate occasions. We finally left right before I turned 11, and my mum put a curse on the house, saying that since our happiness got robbed from us, nobody else should be able to find happiness there. Since then, nobody that has moved in has stayed more than a year at most. The previous occupants of the house I was in had a similar man to how my dad started acting. It could also be related to an old church that was supposedly burned down a long time ago in pretty much the exact spot. I don't really have much evidence of the church other than finding charcoal and bits of stained glass wherever I dug. I'm pretty sure that the jail I work for is haunted. Me and a couple of co-workers were in our mess having our lunch, and someone ended up on the subject of creepy things, and they've had experiences I would say are far worse than my own. This experience is from November of 2018. I had been working at this facility for 2 years at the time. For context, I'll try and describe what our floor looks like in the jail. There's an elevator bay with a big metal door that's controlled by a motor and chain. This is what we call main, or main slider. All traffic comes into the floor from this door. You go down a small passage, and then you're in a space that's the shape of a square, with a smaller square room inside called the cube, which is surrounded by 7 pods for inmates. Each pod has 12 cells and can fit 2 inmates. The cube is used for controlling doors, and basically is an office space where paperwork can be filled out, and where you can sit and watch the pods during your shift. I'm assigned night shift on a floor of non-violent inmates Gen Pop. Typical inmates you find on this floor would be drug users, dealers, petty theft, and the occasional drunkard kind of deal. I was working this floor by myself, and the night was starting off as usual. I show up, lock all pods for the night, conduct my head count, and go back to the cube. An hour later, I conduct my hourly block check. Everyone's asleep or just chilling, so I return to the cube. Not a second I finish sitting down, I hear the sound of someone kicking a cell door. I get up and I start flashing my light through the pods, and eventually narrow it down to B pod 6 cell. One inmate is frantically screaming that his cellmate is coughing up blood and is shaking. I open the door, remove the inmate, and see that his cellmate is foaming from the mouth and is performing what is known as agonal breathing. Essentially, we're listening to him take his final breaths. Long story short, medical gets called, and he's eventually taken to the hospital, but he doesn't make it there and declared dead en route. We come to find out that the inmate had swallowed heroin before he was booked, and one of the packages ruptured while he was in the jail. It was unfortunate, yes, but it's not the first time it's happened, and surely won't be the last. I file my paperwork and continue about life as normal. As another thing for context, we have cameras in the individual cell blocks and cells. We went back and watched the footage of the incident to confirm there wasn't any kind of assault or general roughhousing that would have caused the packages to rupture. The next night, I'm assigned the same floor. Similar process comes and goes. Show up, lock down the pods, conduct count, etc. An hour goes by, and I do my standard check, and I go back to the cube. Again, as I go to sit, I hear 3 loud bangs coming from what sounds like B-pod again. I go in and flash my light. Everyone is sleeping or chilling. I return to the cube. 3 more bangs this time. I refer to my touchscreen to see if the kicking is tripping the lock sensor in the door. Sure enough, B-Pod 6 cell is showing that it's being messed with. The cell was still locked down due to the events of the night before, so no inmate should have been in the cell. I go to the cell, open it, and double check to make sure nothing and no one is in the cell. And no one's in there. My next thought is that the lock is malfunctioning. I exit the cell and walk to the cube to call for maintenance. And as I'm on the phone, the door slams shut, which sends me back out to look. At this point, I'm at a loss for words and have no clue what to do. All the inmates of the pod are also trying to figure out what's going on in their pod, and I'm trying to answer their questions, but genuinely, I have no clue what to tell them. It eventually goes quiet. Maintenance arrives, and I have him check the lock. Nothing in terms of it being a mechanical malfunction. After that night, I asked my watch supervisor to be placed on a different floor. At the time, we had just got a new batch of rookies in, so he gave me my choice of the floors. I've been on my new floor for a little over 2 years now, and I still have things happen that I can't explain, such as audible footsteps from around the cube, the occasional tapping on the glass of the door of the cube, but nothing as drastic as that night in 2018. For a while, I've experienced odd occurrences rather infrequently, but lately, unexplainable things have happened, enough that I'm thinking things are getting worse. I'm a single guy living in a rather large house, and I've had odd stuff happen at each of the houses in which I've lived. A door opening and closing, with footsteps coming in when there's no one else around. The top of a small head of a child appearing to walk behind the counter. A shadow moving in front of a light, but in a place I can't see. There's more, but you get the picture. It's been about 3 years since I moved into this new house across the country, and nothing's happened since, until just recently. About 2 weeks ago, my Roomba vacuum started up on its own. It's an older model that you have to press the button for it to begin the cleaning cycle. It seemed odd, but I didn't pay it much attention. Until last Saturday night, when I was up late. At around midnight, as I was sitting on the couch on my phone, I heard the chime of it activating again to begin its cycle. I was alarmed, but chalked it up again to it being old and malfunctioning. Needless to say, it was weird, but I paid it no mind and went to bed. Last night is when I began to suspect that there might be something else going on, rather than a malfunction. Again, I was on my phone around midnight. At around 12:15, my doorbell rang. I jumped off the couch and ran to the laundry room door and expected to find either a person running off after playing a joke on me or someone in need of help. Nothing. So I walked over to the front door and found my dog growling, and again, looking out of the side window, found no trace of anyone or anything that might have pressed the button. The hairs on the back of my neck were on end, and wave after wave of tingling sensations kept running through me. I searched inside and out, but found nothing. This morning I asked each of my neighbors with Ring doorbells to look on their camera feeds to see if they captured someone running off after playing a joke, but each of them said nothing had been recorded. I'm thoroughly convinced it was a paranormal incident. I'm not worried about it being a malevolent entity, as it's never done any harm, but what does concern me is the frequency. So I bought my home in 2017. It's 105 years old and was completely redone. I have 3 kids, 2 teenagers and 1 12-year-old, and I have had 3 unexplained experiences. The first one, I heard my youngest son come up the stairs and head to his room. I looked towards his room to see him peeking at me through the crack as he closed his door. I jokingly said, "Hey." No response. I went and knocked on his door, and I hear my son downstairs asking, "Are you knocking on my door?" I threw open the bedroom door, honestly thought someone had broken in, and it was empty. Secondly, my eldest son's room is in the attic, and I yelled up his stairs and heard him say, "Yeah?" and I asked him to come downstairs. 10 minutes later, no him. I yell again, and he yells up from downstairs. He hadn't been in his room. He was just out back and had just come in. And thirdly, I'm in my room and I see my daughter, who is in all black, go into her room. But what alerted me was the door didn't close, so she went into her room through the door. I jumped up and threw her door open, and she was on her bed doing homework. I asked her if she had just come upstairs, and she said no, she had been in her room all morning. All of these instances happened in the middle of the day. No weird late night ghost stories vibe. Also, when I got my first apartment before having kids, I noticed that around Halloween, weird things would happen. Footsteps, shadows, etc. These things were easy to write off and explain away, because it was a 3-story apartment, so I assumed it was just other people. Then, after the 3rd year of living there, again around Halloween, my electronics started doing things like my TV would turn on in the middle of the night at full volume. I got the nerve to mention it to one of my neighbors, and she said that she experiences similar things and had for some time because someone had committed suicide in the building about 10 years before, on Halloween. When the TV turned on again, I lost it. I yelled at him to stop it, told him that this wasn't his house, and asked him to please leave me alone because he was frightening me. I never had another experience the rest of the time living there. I'm a skeptic, but I'm not so arrogant to believe I have all the answers. There are still things that I can't explain. The creepiest, potentially paranormal thing that has happened to me took place in the winter of 2011. I was in college and had come home for winter break to spend time with family. For some additional context, my aunt and uncle lived around 30 minutes outside of town. They had a daughter, A, who was a few years younger than me, and 2 significantly younger children, K, aged 2, and T, aged 5. My aunt and uncle were out of town for the night, so the kids were all alone with their older sister. Around 1:30 a.m. that night, my mum received a pretty frantic call from A. She claims that K had woken up several times, in tears, claiming that a monster scratched her. A had chalked it up to a nightmare the first few times, but the last time she lifted up K's pajamas to find large scratch marks, allegedly much larger than the hands of a 2-year-old. The family has no pets, and T had been downstairs with A the entire time. So my mum sent my brothers and me to check on the house and my cousins. When we arrived, the 3 of them were sitting in the living room with the lights on. I checked K's side and found the scratches that A had described. I wouldn't say they were too big to have been caused by K, but they were definitely scratches. My brother and I then split up and made sure all the doors and windows to the house were locked before searching every room. We found nothing out of the ordinary, and decided to group everyone up in the living room for the rest of the night. The kids were finally asleep, so we didn't want to move them for a 30-minute car ride in the middle of the night. Just as we had settled in, my cell phone rang. We were startled at first, but figured a family member was calling for an update. I pulled out my phone, only to wind up terrified and confused. According to the caller ID, the call had come from the house itself. The thing is, there were two landlines. One was in the living room with us. The other was on the top floor of the house, an attic that had been converted into A's bedroom. Needless to say, we left the house as fast as we could. We learned later that there was some funny stuff going on with the phone lines in the house. A few times a day, one of the units would redial a number that had been called recently. The call would disconnect if you answered, and the telephone company explained it as an error with the phone itself. My cousin's family experienced some other potentially paranormal incidents. Some took place before the one I just described, and others took place after. Even moving to a newly constructed home hasn't ceased the activity. Like I mentioned at the start, I consider myself a skeptic. However, my cousins and their family are the reason I'm still open to the existence of the paranormal. My mother and her wife bought a big house in a small village in southern Sweden when I was younger. That's the house I grew up in. I never believed in ghosts or anything like that when I was younger. But that was about to change. I lived alone on the first floor of the house because it only had one bedroom on the entire floor. It was a big house, and the rest of the first floor was a TV room, laundry, and a big inventory. I have stories for days about that house, but here I'll tell you the most scary one, in my opinion. This encounter took place in spring, when I was in the middle of 9th grade in high school. I always stayed up late at night watching MTV in the big TV room downstairs, because I didn't care so much about school since it was going to end in a few weeks, and I had done all my tests. One night, when I was watching the replay of Jersey Shore, which aired at 3 AM in Sweden, I heard someone walking down the stairs. I thought it was my mum that was coming down to tell me to go to sleep, as usual. So I quickly laid down to fake sleep on the couch, so I could blame the noises coming from the TV on that. But the footsteps didn't come closer. Instead, I heard it go up again. After the steps came to the top of the stairs, it went down again. This repeated itself many times, so I went to check on who was walking up and down the stairs. To my surprise, I didn't see anyone walking the stairs, but the steps just continued. I thought to myself, now I've lost it. I stood there beside the stairs and followed the footsteps up and down with my eyes. I thought I was hearing things that weren't there because I didn't sleep much at the time. So I went to the couch, fell asleep, and didn't think much about it. When the alarm rang at 7:30, and I went up to get some breakfast with my mum and my brother, she asked me why I scared my brother at night by walking so much on the stairs. I explained to her what I saw that night, but my mother, skeptic as she always was angry at me because she didn't believe me. A few years went by. I had some more scary encounters, but she always blamed it on the wind, or that it was an old house. I moved out of the house to study in a different city about an hour away from my hometown. Almost a year after I moved, I came home to celebrate my grandmother's birthday. On that occasion, my mother pulled me aside and said, "You've always said there is something else living in our house. How do you make something like that disappear?" I saw in her eyes that she was frightened, so I asked her what had happened. She explained that the night before, she and my siblings slept downstairs because it was really hot upstairs. She woke up because it sounded like there was an intruder in the upstairs kitchen. She said she froze and couldn't move because she was so scared, and prayed that the intruder wouldn't go downstairs. The sounds from the kitchen started at 3 a.m. and stopped somewhere between 3 and 4 a.m. When she went to the kitchen in the morning, nothing was moved or changed. I told my mother, "I told you so," all these years, and he never believed me. She said she was sorry and asked where to go from here. I told her I had no clue, but that house needs to be cleansed. She hired a medium, and I can honestly say that the energy in that house has changed. My old friends who have no idea that the house was ever haunted, or that a medium cleansed it, even said that something felt different about the house. I lived and grew up in a haunted house, but it made me who I am. And I don't regret a thing, because now I know ghosts are real. I don't believe in ghosts, but I don't have any other explanation for this. A few weeks ago, me and a group of friends explored an abandoned, worn-down mall near my place. It's been a while since we've seen each other, so we decided why not do a little get-together. Originally, the plan was just to get some food and eat at the park, so after we ate and hung out some more, we realized it started to get dark and decided to go home. We live around the same neighborhood, so all headed the same way, but on our way there, we saw a big-ass mall with no cars or anything there. It had mold all around and cracks on the wall. That's when one of my friends decided that he'd go to prove that he wasn't a baby. I didn't want to go in since it looked pretty sus, but me and my group didn't want to leave him there by himself. Plus, I was kind of curious, so went with them. Like I said before, the place was pretty worn down. There were parts of the ceiling on the floor and some graffiti on the wall. There were only 3 floors, obviously the highest being the 3rd floor. That's when the douchebag opened his mouth again and suggested that we split up. Getting angrier, I called him a dumbass, and we got into an argument which eventually led everyone agreeing to splitting up in pairs. I still didn't like the idea, but at least I wasn't alone. We all explored different areas of the mall, and the place me and my friend were to explore was the 3rd floor. The whole time, I felt like I was being watched. It scared the hell out of me. To make it even worse, as we were exploring, my friend decided he'd go alone and just dipped while I wasn't looking. My dumbass didn't notice until I turned around and realized he'd left me. At this point, it was starting to really get dark, so I decided to just leave because I couldn't take this anymore. That's when I saw the back door of one of the stores being opened, when I swore it closed when I went past this area with my friend. But that wasn't the only thing that was off. The whole store was trashed. It wasn't like the other stores. They were all empty and just had cracks and mold on the walls, but this one still had clothing racks and shelves inside, even a few pairs of clothes. I ignored it at first, because I thought maybe they forgot to remove them, but at the time, they weren't trashed. They looked like they were pulled off the wall and thrown on the ground. The tables were broken, and some of the clothes were ripped apart. It looked like a bunch of wild animals came in and tore the whole store to shreds. There were even a few claw marks on the walls. How the hell can the whole store be trashed like this in only a few minutes without me noticing? That's when I saw 2 eyes in the room at the back door, then opened its mouth and started to growl. I was frozen. I didn't know what the hell that was. Then, it smiled. It looked like it was mocking me. The teeth were sharp, but human. Thoughts of what it was went through my mind, especially what it might do to me. I needed to get the hell out of there fast. It was creeping me the hell out, and I had to leave. The whole place felt off, and I felt like I was being watched the whole time. And now this happens. Whatever this was, I don't think it wants us here. I had finally built up enough courage and turned around and sprinted downstairs, never looking back. Even if it wasn't chasing me, even if it wasn't real, I didn't want to make sure, because the tiny chance that it wasn't my imagination scared the hell out of me. I screamed for everyone to come downstairs as I ran. Nobody came, nobody even answered, so just continued running. I ran until I got home. I locked all the doors and closed all the windows. My mum watched me like I was some crazy person, which I can't blame her for. I told her everything, and she told me I was probably being a scaredy cat, and that it was just my mind playing tricks on me. Maybe it was, but again, I didn't want to find out. So I told her not to look out the windows, just in case, or go outside, and luckily, she promised she wouldn't. It's been a while since it happened. I called and texted my friends to see if they were okay, and that nothing happened to them. They told me they left earlier, and that they called for me, but I didn't answer, so they just assumed I left. I didn't question them since, honestly, I just wanted to get over it. Nothing happened afterwards, but sometimes I do feel like I'm being watched, but it's probably just my imagination. I can't remember when this started, but I know it's been happening for at least 7 years. Most nights, and occasionally during the daytime, I see blurry but human-like figures that vanish almost instantly after I look at them directly, most often when I'm alone or when not many people are around. For some background, I'm currently 17 and in the UK. I get 8 to 9 hours of sleep most nights, and I don't take anything. I also saw these in my previous childhood home, the house we recently moved from, and less often in other places like buildings or parks. I should also add that while they're creepy, especially at night, I don't feel in danger. It's more unpleasant than anything. The figures themselves are mostly 2 main types, and I've never seen one with a face or any limbs. They're only ever blobs. The one I see most often is black or blackish grey. It's blurry and kind of blends into the air and doesn't touch the floor. They tend to be tallish and like a long oval that's straight at the bottom. I see it both night and day, mostly in halls or rooms. It's only visible in my peripheral vision, and I can't see it directly. The other one I see is beige and similar to the colour of skin. It tends to be shorter, but can be tall and pretty thin. The shape of it is uneven and less blurred, but still kinda blurry. I only see them at night, and mostly in mine and other bedrooms. Unlike the black figures, I can sometimes, but rarely, look at them directly for a second or so. The first time I remember seeing anything was in my childhood home when I was around 10. I would occasionally see those black figures standing around the halls and rooms at night. It was mostly at 12 when we moved that I started seeing them more often. For a couple of years, it was only the black figures at night being still around my room, and in the toilet or stairs, even in my peripheral, they would only last seconds and were not too noticeable. As I turned 14, I started noticing them longer, and occasionally the beige figures would turn up. By this point, it was almost a daily occurrence, and they would even sway and move slightly. It wasn't harmful, but 14 to 16 was when I saw them the most. I don't know how relevant this is, but at this point, I was also very tired most of the time, and fainted during class. I got a blood test for my iron levels because of it, but the results were normal. During this time period, there were also 2 points where I had dreams involving them. At first, I can't remember too much of the dream, but I remember being in a dark room and opening a box. When I turned around, I saw one of those black figures behind me, And that was when I woke up. After waking up, I think I had sleep paralysis, which in itself didn't scare me, but when I looked up, the figure from my dream was standing over me at the end of my bed. It was the clearest I ever saw it, and it looked just black, like a blob, but it had white circles that I thought were eyes. I was creeped out, so I just closed my eyes and waited for it to end. I got up and my day was normal after. The second time was only a dream that involved me in a forest with a weird creature that resembled the beige ones I see. I think we spoke a bit, but without talking. When it looked me in the eyes, I woke up. Currently, I don't see them as much or for as long, though I do more so at night.